Back to court in just a minute, but first here's a quick look at some of the other cases we're tracking today on this Monday at Court TV. In Massachusetts, after 5.5 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of guilty for Brian Walsh. He'll be sentenced on Wednesday for murdering his wife, Ada. In Ohio, day 4 of testimony underway in the trial for Paul Hicks, who's accused of drowning his estranged wife, Regina, back 25 years ago in a car. In Florida, closing arguments underway in the penalty phase for Jason Banegas. He's the man who pled guilty to an October 2021 murder of a Hollywood, Florida police officer. The state is seeking the death penalty. He pled guilty, but now it's the penalty phase. Let's go into the courtroom now. We're listening to the state's closing argument, the last word before this jury makes this very difficult decision, a recommendation of either life or death.
Heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Heinous means extremely wicked or shockingly evil. Atrocious means outrageously wicked and vile. Cruel, designed to inflict a high degree of pain with utter indifference to or even enjoyment of the suffering of others. The kind of crime intended to be included as especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel is one accompanied by additional acts that show the crime was conscienceless or pitiless and unnecessarily torturous. The Yandy Chirino. Now, I'm sorry to have to do this, but if we're going to talk about the circumstances in which Officer Chirino lost his life, we have to go over the evidence. So if I may, I will. This is in evidence. This is that CAD sheet, computer-aided dispatch, if you remember. There was a lot of time spent on this. And it goes from bottom to top. You're reading from bottom to top here. You see the little speaker on the bottom. The audio should play. At 22:52:54, that means at 10:52 p.m., 54 seconds, 10:52 and 54 seconds p.m., this is Officer Chirino going on the radio that he's responding.
Please test 3 for Alpha 20. What's your test 20? The roundabout at what 10:20? I'm having one total. Roundabout at Clark? Okay, right, video match. Very good. Just follow what's your location.
Give me your appointment.
And step 3.
Good morning.
Cut.
I'll be down to the shop right now.
Tap on for conversation.
So officer shot. 22:55:29 versus 22:52:54. Sometime in that window, Officer Chirino was shot. What you heard there was Officer Blevins. Officer shot.
Please test 3 for Alpha 20. What's your test 20? The roundabout at what 10:20?
I'm having one total.
Roundabout at Clark? Okay, right, video match. Very good. Just follow what's your location.
Give me your appointment.
And step 3.
Good morning.
Cut.
I'll be down to the shop right now.
Tap on for conversation.
I'm at the park. Overall, Casper Court.
Park on Casper Court. On Casper Court.
Yeah, I'm off the sorry. You do it now.
Tap on units response code 3.
How long is it on code 3?
All units response code 3. Park on Casper Court.
Anything wrong?
Give me a call when you can.
Jonathan, recording.
Johnson and Casper Court, so far.
Hey, maybe shop and feed. Everyone get a exact location, please. So,
Any being sent for an exact location.
provide more information also. Sister, look that. I'm at the park. 10-46 Avenue off Casper Court.
3602.
I need somebody to now just do CPR.
Chopper starting CPR.
Where's he at?
Chopper, advise an exact location, please. Chopper.
See if we can start out being fun to help us out in the area.
Chopper, how many other you call created? 362
10-20, where are they?
Alleging a car long past report. Unfortunate.
So dealing with the subject here. The rule only is to spot the exact location code right here.
Chopper, we have just on code 3.
And you come on the west side or the east side?
Can I in the area advice?
Is that the main one at the floor? He needs to come up closer.
He just come on till.
Alright, I gotta use the right company.
Is it Mars the one card?
Alright, I gotta use it.
Chopper, enemy country.
Pretty good, all nice one. So, give me an address over there. You're the perfect for one to leave the bean company.
Can I need advice on the subject? And if anyone can confirm, is it Mars the one card?
316, that's their detail for.
Chopper, North Element 42 Terrace. Just confirming.
Everyone, I need an update on house from first shot. I'm going to clear path for rescue. Everyone clear path for rescue. Okay. I'll get up. Hey, 14, I'm transporting.
14 arriving here transporting.
14, where are you at now? 10-4. Hold up to 4-6. You're going right up.
46 of Hill.
So it goes on, and ladies and gentlemen, that will go back into evidence with you, and you can listen to it at your leisure. It's hard to understand. It's a panicked moment. It's a heightened emergency moment. They're speaking in police lingo that most of us don't understand. But what I want you to focus on is the time. How long that went on. How long did that play before you heard Officer Blevins and you hear the panic in his voice? I'm still dealing with the subject. That entire time, Yandy Chirino was on the ground, having been shot twice, bleeding, and beginning the process of dying. And let's not sugarcoat this. His teeth were in the grass. Bone fragments are in the grass. Dr. Robinson, the former assistant chief medical examiner, testified to the injuries. He said this was not an immediately incapacitating injury. Officer Chirino was aware of what was happening to him. Officer Chirino knew, no doubt, based on his training and his experience, that these were potentially fatal wounds. That his life was slipping away from this. And those additional acts committed by the defendant, do you remember Officer Blevins' testimony? Begging him to stop resisting so he could render aid. Not immediately incapacitating, and he suffered these injuries. And make no mistake, he was shot twice. You know, Dr. Anderson came in here and maybe tried to suggest that because additional testing wasn't done, the wound be that it was not an entrance wound, or that you couldn't tell it was an entrance wound. But Dr. Anderson did say that an opinion based upon insufficient evidence is not worth much. Well, that's not fair. That's not what he said. He said an opinion that is not based on sufficient information cannot be within a reasonable degree of medical probability. That's the standard a medical expert testifies to in court. So then I asked him, well, when did you do the autopsy? He never even saw Officer Chirino's body. Dr. Robinson did. Dr. Robinson's hands in the photo, as he told you. Dr. Robinson described the two distinct wound paths coming out, the joint exit wound on the other side. He talked about characteristics of entrance versus exit wounds and why he made the determination by seeing the body up close and doing the analysis, that this wound B ultimately was an exit wound. There were 2 shell casings in the grass, if you remember. It is indicative that the gun was fired twice. And certainly I agree with Dr. Robinson, I agree with Dr. Anderson, just because a gun is fired twice doesn't mean the victim was hit twice, of course. But in this case, we have additional facts to suggest he was struck twice. Those 2 shell casings are in evidence. I didn't put the pictures up there because if you remember, they were buried in the grass and they were very hard to see, but they're there. There's also a live round. And if you remember the testimony of Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Laboratory Eddie Figueroa, he described, well, he told you, no doubt, that those 2 shell casings came from this gun, and that live round was cycled through. So it wasn't fired, it was cycled through this firearm. Why is that important? Well, that live round got cycled through that firearm, and if you remember the description by Mr. Figueroa, how a semi-automatic firearm works, with each pull of the trigger, projectile goes out, fired shell casing gets ejected, and the next round comes up ready to be fired. And with each pull of the trigger, you fire the gun. Or, by pulling the slide back, it will eject the live round. Remember Officer Blevins' testimony. They were on the ground, wrestling over the gun. As Officer Chirino, after being shot twice, is fighting for his life, that other round gets ejected.
Judge, proximate evidence.
Sidebar.
Okay, heading to a sidebar during the closing argument for the state of Florida. Let's get a break. We'll get you back into the courtroom for more. Jason Banegas, his life will soon be in the hands of a Florida jury. Stay with us. Let's head back to Florida now. We're watching key testimony in the penalty phase for Jason Banegas. The then 18-year-old is facing the death penalty after he pled guilty to fatally shooting an officer back in 2021. 28-year-old Yandy Chirino was shot in the face after responding to a 911 call reporting that Banegas was trying to break into cars. Now he's potentially facing the death penalty for shooting this officer. Let's go back into the courtroom. We're listening to the closing arguments in this case. The penalty phase, keep that in mind. This is the state of Florida.
Two fired shell casings fired from this firearm. 2 wounds. And then he continued to commit those additional acts by resisting and preventing Officer Blevins from rendering aid. You heard the panic in Officer Blevins' voice on the CAD audio, and you heard it from the stand. Please stop resisting. I don't want to spend too much time on it. There was some debate why we didn't wait for EMS or something like that. I mean, you know all the reasons why they didn't wait for EMS. The scene would have to be clear. They have lights and sirens ability. They have a load and go policy. They rushed him in the car to get him to medical treatment as quickly as possible. I don't think anything more needs to be said about that. And as Officer Chirino is on the ground, suffering from these gunshot wounds, continuing to fight for his life, his training and experience tells him his brothers and sisters in blue are on the way. And now he knows they're in danger. Part of heinous, atrocious, and cruel is the mental torture that the victim undergoes as they die. This could not have been any more torturous for Officer Chirino, knowing that not only is he in danger, but so are his brothers and sisters, and he can't do anything about it. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the death of Officer Yandy Chirino was in fact heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and I would ask you to find so on your verdict form. All right, so those are the aggravators. What's next? Mitigation. Okay? 41. Remember, mitigation can be anything. Aggravators are defined by statute. Mitigators can be anything. And the standard is very low. And in light of that, I will concede that all but 2 mitigators have been proven. Number 39 and number 40, I believe it is, that he didn't have the capacity to understand the criminality of his conduct. Oh, he most certainly did. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, he was 18, I think a month shy of his 19th birthday when he committed this crime. That's a fact. But he knew he needed to apply 6.25 pounds of pressure with each trigger pull to make that gun go off. And remember, that's with one finger. There's only 6 pounds on here because I don't have a quarter-pound weight, but this is 6 pounds. You felt it. You know what it takes. But other than that, other than those 2 mitigators, consider all of it proven. No doubt. He had a lousy childhood. His mother certainly was not going to win Mother of the Year awards. He came from a bad neighborhood. Remember this. Mitigation neither excuses nor justifies the murder. And I didn't even tell you that. The defense team told you that. The mitigation neither excuses or justifies the murder. So how do you account for it in your punishment decision? Well, this is that weighing, right? Now we're gonna give meaning to the aggravators. We're gonna give meaning to the mitigators. So what do they mean? I mean, it's one thing to say he was from Alabama. All right, the judge read this to you already, so I don't have to go over it with you completely, but this is the instruction on how you weigh the evidence. This is how you evaluate the individual testimony from individual witnesses. And again, you'll have this in writing. Let's go over some of the experts that were retained and came and testified to you. And remember, let's not bypass it. Number 6, has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit in order to get the witness to testify? It's a very hard name to pronounce. I think it's Dr. Wu, if I remember correctly. I've never seen a name with no consonants. So he's a neuropsychologist, no doubt about that. He charges $450 an hour. Well, why is it important that he's a neuropsychologist? He's a neuropsychologist because his expert is the brain, right? Things like executive functioning. As a neuropsychologist, he makes a living and a career by testing people to see what, it's one thing, history tells you one thing, but then they do the testing. He never met the defendant. Now, that doesn't mean you should disregard his testimony. I have no doubt his qualifications are what he testified they are. But what did he do? A neuropsychologist who could have tested that defendant and given you an insight into what's going on up there, didn't do any testing. Please consider that. Now, the question was, well, you were hired in 2023 and then his executive function could have improved. Well, Dr. Anderson was hired a few months after the incident. Dr. Wu was hired when Dr. Wu was hired. And in the end, what did he tell you? Young men are different. And when I grew up, the phrase was, he's a young, dumb kid. We all were. And hopefully we grow out of it. You don't need an expert to tell you that. You knew that from day one when you walked into this courtroom. But he acknowledged. I know he brought up, you have to be 25 to rent a car because of the underdeveloped brain. But he did acknowledge, and he didn't fight me on it, that all these things that 18-year-olds get to do, they get to join the military. They get to vote. They can enter into a contract. They can sue somebody. In every state in America, by 18, you can drive. Well, by age, you're eligible to drive. You can become a police officer, all at 18. So this concept that 18-year-olds have no capacity to do anything, I'm sure there are some. I would be curious to find out what the testing would have showed. But he never even met the defendant. So consider that. Consider that and how much weight you give to Dr. Woe's testimony, that he never even met the defendant or never did any testing. Testing that he's more than qualified to do, and testing that he does on a regular basis. Micah Johnson, sociologist. Sociologists don't do testing. A UCLA professor. He gets charged $250 an hour. But like Dr. Wu, Dr. Johnson can't tell you how many hours he has in the week. Just doesn't seem to know. Or maybe he doesn't want you to know. I don't know. But he couldn't tell you. Talked about the ACEs. We'll come back to that in a second. Allapattah. Dr. Johnson talked about Allapattah as if he was the expert of the world on the city of Allapattah. Like there was something unique and specific about Allapattah. And he acknowledged, no, there's places down in Dade County like Overtown or Liberty City, and there's similar places in Broward County. You know, nothing unique about Allapattah. It's a bad neighborhood in South Florida. All
right, the state presenting to the jury their closing argument. This is their argument to recommend death for this 23-year-old defendant. With us, Joe Hennessy, watching along with us, he's a criminal defense attorney, former police officer. This is a police officer who was the victim in this case. The age of the victim, of the defendant, excuse me, the victim was 28, also very young. You saw his family in the courtroom there. This is just very emotional trial, very emotional closings right now. How do you think the defendant's age, 18 at the time, 23 now, will factor in here when you're asking jurors to recommend the death penalty for someone who is young, no matter what he's done?
I think the emerging adult argument is going to play a compelling argument for the defense in this case. You have an 18-year-old involved in the shooting. However, I think the jury is going to be torn by the mental torture that Officer Chirino faced as he was passing away. And I think that's going to be the most compelling argument here.
A lot of times in these penalty phases in a death case, you do get because you have to put it all out there for these individuals on the jury. They're making an incredibly difficult decision, life or death. You get to the whole backstory of the defendant. In this case, this is a young man whose mother apparently was a prostitute, left alone at times, was part of the system since the age of 12. How will that play in?
I think it's going to play some part. The family's going to, the jury is going to be looking at the family history, his past, the emerging adult argument, 18 years old, his criminal past. I'm not familiar with what his criminal past looked like. And the other, if I was on the jury, I'd be looking at whether he showed any type of remorse here. As a former police officer, I'm having trouble siding on the defense on this argument. You have a police officer who wasn't even scheduled to work that day, working. He is shot in the face, and the defendant here showed absolutely no remorse at the scene for this officer.
Yeah, it's a very difficult case. Reminder, 8-4. It used to be, unanimous in the state of Florida, and it is unanimous in pretty much the entire country. But they changed the law following the Parkland school shooters' death recommendation or lack of, and now it's down to 8-4. So that also not good for the defendant. One could argue. Let's get a break. When we come back, more from the state, and then eventually we'll hear from the defense. Stay with us.
Tonight, on closing arguments, the jury has spoken and Brian Walsh has been found guilty of murder. We'll look at what led to today's big verdict as our experts weigh in.
Closing arguments with Vinny Politan tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV. 'Tis the season for true crime. Each morning we'll dive into a case that took place around the holidays. Join us for the 12 days of holiday crimes.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
Back to Florida now, where a man charged in the death of a police officer back in court to be sentenced. The jury will decide whether Jason Banegas deserves the death penalty or life in prison without parole for killing Hollywood police officer Yandy Chirino back in 2021. Banegas pled guilty to first-degree murder in the death earlier this year. Let's head back to the courtroom. We're listening to the closing argument from the state of Florida.
And I asked, how much time did you spend in Alabama? I think his answer was maybe an hour, about an hour. All that information he gave you about Alabama, he looked up. Unlike Dr. Wu, he met the defendant. And he did 4, I put in quotes, qualitative interviews. Qualitative interviews. And most of what he talked about was the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And ladies and gentlemen, it is not a test. It is a questionnaire. You answer yes or no. It's 10 questions. Now, Dr. Johnson said something along the lines of, once you get above a 4, off the rails we go. And he was at a 9. Hell, I'm a 6. But that ACEs, predictive, right? Predictive behavior, risk factors, things of that nature. No doubt, there are some risk factors there. Conceded completely. But he met with him 4 times. I believe it was 17 and a half hours or something like that he spent with the defendant. And I asked him, all these things in his past led him to that moment. It's not an excuse. It's not justification. So, doctor, when you asked him why he pulled the trigger, what did he say? I didn't ask him that. When you asked him why he fired a second time, what did you say? I didn't ask him that. Don't we want to know that? If the ACEs and the adverse childhood experiences are what led to this moment, to use his words, what predicted this moment, ask him why. But he didn't. You can figure out for yourself why he didn't. Dr. Johnson also kind of, maybe it's me, and if you disagree with me, by all means disagree. But when he was talking about car hopping, like it was just the latest social media trend and it was cool, it's breaking into cars. I know there's a reason for it. And I know people steal because they're hungry. But you're still stealing. You're still breaking into cars. And if you remember correctly, on this night, the night he killed Officer Chirino, how he did it was an afterthought. Car broke down. I'm in another neighborhood. Let's go steal a bike and break into some cars. Like it was nothing. So I don't know, Dr. Johnson just seemed to minimize that behavior, and the whole gun culture and rap seemed to come up. And we're gonna get to the gun with the next witness. So again, take what you want from Dr. Johnson's testimony. It would have been real nice if he actually asked the defendant why he shot the officer and what was going through his head. Dr. Castillo, $250 an hour. She did 122 hours in this case. My math, if that's correct, is $30,500 in this case. Okay, she deserves to get paid for her work, for sure. Everybody does. $30,500. She's testified in 67 capital cases, or worked on 67 capital cases. And I asked her, is 122 hours, is that about right, average for capital? She said yes. She makes $2,043,500 doing this. Please consider that when you consider her testimony. Because like Dr. Wu, she is a psychologist. And she gives psychological testing all the time. And she's trained to do so. Again, remember, has the witness been offered or received any money preferred treatment? $2 million. Not chump change. Not in this case. $2 million. Doing this kind of work. All right, so she said the defendant did understand right from wrong and did understand the consequences of his actions. I specifically asked her, I said, was he insane? Was he not guilty by reason of insanity? No, he not at all. She talked about trauma, and trauma, and that's her specialty, as I recall, but acknowledged that the defendant does not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. She didn't even find the need to test him for post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's important, ladies and gentlemen, because if you remember correctly, psychologists have that book, the DSM, that has the diagnostic criteria for every malady that they deal with. And there are specific criteria, kind of like the elements of a crime or the elements of an aggravator. If we don't prove them all, they don't exist, right? If they're not all there, then it doesn't exist. He does not have PTSD. I'm not suggesting he did not suffer trauma in his lifetime. Not suggesting that at all. But she said, Dr. Castillo, that he doesn't suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. He obtained his GED. He failed multiple times. And I don't say that as a slight. He deserves credit for continuing to try and finally succeeding in getting his GED. And he did. One of the traumatic incidences that she discussed, that she went over, is that his friend was shot and killed, basically right in front of him. He saw him get on the street. His friend made it to the hospital, but didn't survive. And that was a traumatic incident.